Hey, for this section, we're going to be focusing on overlapping action and follow-through. This is also going to introduce some new features in After Effects called parenting. This is when we're going to be attaching two layers to each other. So we're going to create a new composition by going to Composition, New Composition, and we're going to make the duration 5 seconds for now, 24 frames per second, 1920 by 1080. We're going to name this Exercise 8. I'm going to hit OK. And we're going to need to make two separate layers. So one of them is just going to be a regular shape layer that consists of a rectangle. So layer, new shape layer, and I'm going to use the rectangle primitive to create a simple rectangle. Oops. If you hold down Shift, it will be a square, but we just want a rectangle. Okay, and I'm going to move the anchor point into the rectangle. Then we're going to need to create a little pendulum that's going to hang from the rectangle. Now we need that to be a separate layer so that they can move independently. I'm going to first take shape layer 1, hit the return key on the keyboard and call it rectangle. Then I'm going to create a new shape layer, and I'm going to name this shape layer pendulum. So on the pendulum layer, I'm going to create a circle. There we go. And I'm holding down the Shift key so that it's a perfect circle. And then I'm going to grab the rectangle tool, and I still have the pendulum selected. So when I draw this rectangle, it's going to be added to the pendulum layer. And that's okay, because we're going to move them both together. And I'm going to left mouse down and drag. And that places the rectangle with it. That places the rectangle above it, and we're just going to nudge it over so it's right centered. There we go. And if you ever want to make changes to the position of either of these, just open up the pendulum layer, click on the little arrow to the left of contents, and when it drops down, it's going to say ellipse 1 and rectangle 1. So we can just nudge them so that the rectangle is right above the ellipse. Okay, and we're going to want to take the pendulum and move the anchor point. We're going to want to take the anchor point and move it to the top, because we want to hinge this pendulum right on the bottom of the rectangle, so that when we rotate, it will rotate in place. And it should ideally look like it's connected the whole time. And let's take that ellipse and nudge it over. There you go. So we select the pendulum, and when we rotate the pendulum, it should look like it's attached to the rectangle at all times, and it should rotate from the top. Same thing as like a rope hanging from the ceiling, or a wrecking ball. The chain coming down from a wrecking ball, when the ball swings, it stays hinged to where it's connected to the device. So now what we're going to do is, I'm going to close contents for the rectangle and the pendulum. What we're going to do is we're going to have the rectangle come back in anticipation, then move forward and settle. And we're going to do that first. And then we're going to have the pendulum react, because the rectangle is going to be our primary action, the main thing that's going to be moving. The pendulum is going to be reacting to the rectangle's movement, and that's called overlapping action and follow-through. It's the equivalent of, if you're walking, the way your arms or even your upper body react to your legs, because your legs would be the primary action. Or if we were on top of a skateboard, and the skateboard's moving, and then it hits a rock, the skateboard is going to come to a stop. The person on top of it is going to keep going. They're going to be reacting. They're going to be falling off of the skateboard. Or if you're in a car and the car suddenly comes to a sudden stop or makes a very sudden turn, the reason why we have to wear seatbelts is because we're going to be reacting to that turn. The car's going to stop. We're going to want to keep going. And that's what's going to happen here. When the rectangle stops, the pendulum's going to want to keep going. So we're going to take the rectangle. Now, before we start moving, if we do move the rectangle forward, it's going to leave the pendulum behind, and therefore we would have to animate the pendulum just remaining attached to the rectangle, which, while we could do that, is extra work that's unnecessary. So what we can do instead is what's called parenting. We're going to attach this pendulum to the rectangle so that when the rectangle moves, the pendulum will automatically move with it. And then we don't have to do what we call corrective animation, animating it in a way to just keep it seemingly attached. So we can do that by using the parent and link attribute. If it's not showing up for you, you can have this section show up by moving your arrow to the right side of your set of layers. Say down here, it might look a little different for you. Mode or track mat or parent link may or may not be showing up. What we want is the parent and link. So if it's not showing up, you can move your arrow to the far right side, and if you hover, it's going to say stretch, right mouse click, and then columns will appear, and you're going to want parent and link. Modes are not necessary right now, so I'm just going to check that off. We don't really need it right now, but this is the one we'll need. So under the parent and link, you have what looks like a spiral. It's called a pick whip, and to the right of it, you have what looks like a little drop-down menu. And they're both different ways that you can parent one object to the other. So we want to we want to have the pendulum follow the rectangle. We want the rectangle to be the parent. So there's two ways that you can do it. One is you can go to the pendulum layer, grab the pick whip. So it looks like a little spiral. Left mouse down and drag. And when you drag, a little line is going to come out from the pick whip. Drag it over to where it says rectangle until it highlights. And then when you let go, it's going to say to.rectangle underneath or within the little drop-down menu. Alternatively, you also could go to the drop-down menu, click on it, and select. For me, it says to rectangle because it is the second layer. But if we were to change the order of these, if I were to move the pendulum down, then it will say one rectangle because it's the first layer. So you can always change the layer order at any point. That doesn't really change your parenting. So now the pendulum is following the rectangle. So if I were to grab the rectangle and move it around, see how the pendulum remains attached? When I hold down Command and hit the Z key to go back. Now if I were to move the pendulum can move by itself. So we're going to move the rectangle first and not worry about what the pendulum's doing yet, and then we're going to animate the pendulum afterwards. So we're going to, let's say, go to frame 6 to start the rectangle's action. I'm just going to close pendulum because we're not doing anything with it yet. And I'm going to go to the position and click on the position stopwatch to place a key down. And then, let's say at 10 frames, we're going to move the pendulum back a little bit. That's called anticipation. Anticipation is an action that is preceded by another action. Before you can jump up, you have to bend down. So before we go forward, it's more impactful if we go back first. It'll make the action seem more interesting. Then we're going to shoot forward. Let's see, we're at 10. So let's try at 1 second. That might be too fast, but we'll see. So over here. In fact, yeah, let's move it a little further apart. We're going to go into the graph editor to slow down this ending. So right now, it's very, very, very mechanical. But that's okay for now. We have the positions. So it has the starting position, comes back, shoots forward, and then it just comes to a sudden stop. We could overshoot and settle back if we wanted to, but we'll just have it slow to a stop. Okay, so to do that, we can go over here and let's grab the graph editor and let's select this. Although if you have the layer selected, it will already show up on the graph editor. But we can click on this anyway, and that way if we're on any other layer, the position will still show up. Now remember, before we can do any edits in the graph editor, we have to break the X and the Y values so that they are separated. You can do that one of two ways. You can, one, click down here at the bottom, there we go, where it says separate dimensions, and that would do it. Or you can right mouse click on position, and in the drop down menu that appears, you can go to separate dimensions, and either one will do the same thing. So now X and Y are separated, and that's going to allow us to, I'm just going to undo the show transform box, we don't need that. And that's going to allow us to go through and adjust the handles and adjust the keyframes so that the keyframes for the X and Y value can be different. We don't necessarily need the Y value to change. We have 3 Y keyframes. We only need the beginning and the end, so I'm just going to delete the one we don't need now that they're separated. So now, let's try adjusting this. So this is to go back and this is to go forward. Remember, a lower X value is moving stage left. A higher X value moves stage right. Okay, and let's move this. So what this is going to do, adjusting this handle down, making it more of a U shape, means it's going to slow down. So it's going to come back, slow down, and then progressively gain speed. So now here, it's coming to a sudden stop, which is rather unnatural. So I'm going to take this handle and move it to the left. So now what it's doing is it pulls back, slows down, launches forward, progressively gains speed, and then slows to a stop. So let's hit the space bar. Okay. If you do want to have an overshoot and settle, you could add another key right after, or you can take this handle and move it up. And so what it'll do is it will overshoot, it'll go higher than its final value and then come back. There we go. So it comes back, launches forward. We could essentially do that here too. We could remove this key, but I have it here just so that there's more space dedicated to the anticipation. Okay, so once you're satisfied with the movement of the rectangle, now it's time to go into the pendulum. So I'm going to close the rectangle and I'm going to go into the pendulum. And actually, let's first take these off of the graph because we don't really need it right now. Close the rectangle and let's go to the pendulum. And it's actually the rotation we're going to want to work with. Okay, so it does not start moving. Let's get off the graph for a second. Okay, does not start moving until we get to this point. So we're going to put a keyframe for the rotation only. We're not moving the position of the pendulum, just the rotation. So we're going to place a keyframe for the rotation on the very last frame that the object stays still. Because we're not really going to have any, unless the pendulum was already swinging when we started, we're not going to do that. We're just going to leave it still. Then when it goes back, we're going to drag, and by drag I mean have the object go the opposite direction. So it's moving stage left, it's going to swing stage right. And let's actually have it swing more rapidly. Okay. And it looks a little off, and that's because this part is easing and this is going at the same rate. So we are going to have to work with this on the graph. Okay, and then as it comes to a stop and then starts to swing forward, we're going to want the pendulum, or move stage right, we're going to want the pendulum to move stage left, to swing stage left. And then as it reaches the end, we're going to have it swing all the way to the other side. Swing all the way to the other side, then swing the other direction, to the left. That is probably not enough time. Let's move it over a little. Okay, swing this way, to the left, and then let's move it back to the right, but it's going to be less. Then to the left, but less. Then to the right, but less. Then to the left. And if you're not sure how far, like if you went farther than you went before or less far, you can look at the numbers. And 4.7, let's try -3. Let's try 2 or 2. And 1. Let's try 0.5. Negative 0.3. 0.1. And then 0. And let's see how that looks. These might be too close together. Worked okay. It's a little rapid. Let's move these a little further apart. No, we haven't gotten to the graph yet. Okay, that looks better. Okay, so now when it pulls back, this part could use an adjustment of timing, right when it's moving stage right. A little bit. Okay, so let's go into the graph. So we can click on rotation for the graph. We can go into the graph itself. And we don't have to do separate dimensions. It's not really a thing for rotation. That's because for position, you have the X and the Y. And if we were working in 3D, we'd have a Z value. And right now, those positions are kept as the same keyframes unless you separate them. But rotation is just one object that gets keyed. So what we could do is, when looking in the graph, the lines are straight lines, very jagged. And one thing that's going to help is adding some handles in here and turning these into more U shapes. And that way you'll have some easing in and out of these positions. So I'm going to switch the pen tool to the convert vertex tool. And I'm going to take this, pull it. Pull these out. Okay, so it swings back. And let's pull this. Now let's see how that looks. It might swing too far too fast. Yeah, let's move this key over a little bit. Okay. It really should not swing that far back until the rectangle has picked up speed. It'll swing a little bit. Okay, how's that looking? Okay, yeah, that looks better. So by the time it starts to swing back, then the rectangle's shooting forward. Yeah, we're good. And then here, swings. Let's see what it looks like with a curve here. That might swing too soon. Yeah, it's too soon. So let's undo that. Okay. Or if we do add it, let's move this over. Or possibly push this up so that it's a little bit more jagged. We don't want it to swing forward too soon. It should start swinging forward when this has started slowing down. So, turn this on. Okay. So it's starting. Let's move this up a little more. And let's move this down. Okay. And let's take all of these and move them stage right a little bit. Okay. Okay. So once it swings, and let's move this one over a little bit. Oops. I want to move all of them over. Okay. And then I'm going to grab the convert vertex and give these some ease. So giving these some curves. Move these out. Okay. And the last ones, there's barely any change, so there's probably no need to add curves to that. Let's see how this looks. And where does it end? It ends at -4. Let's see. 3. -4. Looks like I might have moved everything down a little bit. Where is this at? 0. -11, -2. Okay, so I'm just going to take these and move these up a little bit. There we go. And that should end at about 0, or almost 0. Let's zoom in a little. -4. Okay, let's zoom in a little more. Okay. Plus. And then have it settle at, turn this to 0. Okay, so let's see how that looks. There we go. So it shoots ahead, shoots stage right, comes to a stop. And it overshoots and comes back. The pendulum doesn't really follow the rectangle jolting back suddenly, so I'm going to fix that on the rectangle. And that's going to be the X position. Stop the rotation. Okay, so I'm going to take this and I'm just going to angle this down so that it just comes to a stop rather than overshooting and settling. Otherwise I have to go through and fix the pendulum to have it react to that jolt. Okay, so and there we go. And that is moving a pendulum, or attaching a pendulum to a rectangle and moving it. Let's shrink down the duration, because it looks like the duration might be a little longer than necessary. Okay, so it comes to a stop about 3 seconds in. Okay, let's shrink the duration of the composition to 306. I'm going to go to Composition, Composition Settings, and change it to 5, from 5 to 306. I'm going to hit OK. Okay, and then don't forget to save. And that is creating an object that is your primary motion, where the motion begins, the primary action, being the rectangle in this case, and then adding or attaching another object to it, and that's called parenting. And the object that's attached, we're treating that as a secondary animation, overlapping action and follow through. We're following the main action once we have it done, and making the second object, the object that's attached, react to your main object.